That's on record. Oh, hold.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو الأول وهو الآخر وهو الظاهر وهو الباطن لا إله إلا هو لا إله إلا الله. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for taking the time and effort to be present here. One of the
Leah was supposed to communicate with you the items in the program.
okay.
With your permission, I'll just introduce you to our audience.
Bismillah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, salamun min Allahi alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this special program at the Johannesburg Sufi Centre. And I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of myself, Sheikh Fadullah, and all of you here at the centre to welcome Dr. Ali Allawi and introduce you to his very rich life, his contribution in politics, in business, in academia, and in general affairs. I think if we want to go through everything in his biography, we need at least half an hour. But very briefly, Dr. Ali Allawi was born in Baghdad in December 1947. He graduated with a BSc in Civil Engineering from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in 1968. He went on and completed his doctorate in regional planning at the London School of Economics, early 70s. He didn't put a date there.
77.
And also has an MBA from the Harvard University in Boston. That was 1971. If whatever is there on the website is correct. Following completion of his studies in US and UK, he started his careers and he worked in different places with the World Bank, and he later on established a financial bank and worked in different places in UK, in the Gulf, in Kuwait and Emirates, as well as in Iraq.
Iraq, no, but I couldn't go into Iraq.
Beirut and other parts of the world. He later on focused more on his academic career and became an associate member and senior fellow in different institutions, including the St. Anthony College in Oxford and in Tufts University in the US as well. Later on moved to Malaysia, worked there for a couple of years in one of the universities, and currently he is a research professor in the National University of Singapore. As far as his political life is concerned, he was our first Minister of Trade following the establishment of the interim Iraqi Authority, the Governing Council, in September 2003. And then in 2004 he became our first civilian Minister of Defense. He was in this post for several months and then became our Minister of Finance. According to some of my colleagues who have worked in the Ministry of Finance, they remember him as one of the best ministers of finance that we had post 2003. In 2006, he left politics and focused more on his private business and academia, and started to publish some important books from 2007 onward. One of the most important books that he's written is called The Occupation of Iraq, Winning the War, Losing the Peace. This was published in early 2007, and it has to, you have to remember that the circumstances that the book was written in. The most difficult years in Iraq post-2003 were 2004, 5, 6. So Dr. Allawi was there right from the beginning. He lived all the difficulties that the Iraqi society has gone through in the most difficult environment that you could ever think about, trying to make a contribution to building this new socio-political economic system that has emerged in Iraq post-2003. The book was voted as one of the top 10 non-fiction books by the Washington Post in 2003, and it has been a well-read book, an important reference for all those that want to understand well the situation in Iraq between 2003 and 2007. Apparently he enjoyed writing, so he continued to publish more books. On average, he published one important book every 2 years or so. So his second book was published in 2009, and it was called The Crisis of Islamic Civilization. In my view, this is also one of the most important books that Dr. Allawi has written. The topic is important, and the issues that he addressed are very relevant to Muslim societies in different parts of the world. And probably some of the things he would talk about today in his lecture are relevant to his second book. His third book was published in 2013.
No, actually, just a few days ago. It's supposed to be published.
It's a comprehensive biography of King Faisal I, the first king in Iraq post British colonization and the establishment of the Iraqi state after the end of the Ottoman Empire. I haven't seen the book yet, so I'm not in a position to talk about it in detail. But given Dr. Allawi's style of writing in his first and second book, I think this will also be an important contribution when it comes to that period in the history of Iraq and the region. He is currently also busy writing or preparing his fourth book on the greatest master, Ibn Arabi, and this is his link with Sufism and the prominent figures in the history of Islam and Sufism. Dr. Allawi has been coming to South Africa on a regular basis. I've been waiting for this opportunity to meet him because when I arrived in April 2011, I was told by Sheikh Fadullah that he usually comes to attend the annual conference of the Academy of Self-Knowledge, but over the past 2 years, for I think reasons beyond his control, he couldn't make it. So we are very glad to have him here, and we are very glad to listen to him talking about an update on the current status of the Muslims of Allawi.
Well, thank you very much, really, for this fulsome introduction, and I can only thank you and be honored by the very kind words that you have spoken, Your Excellency. I need not remind you all that we have here one of the finest ambassadors and representatives of Iraq, and I think this country is lucky to have a person of such stature and quality. My book is called, that I'm working on now, is called In Search of the Greatest Master, but I haven't yet quite reached the conclusion as to who is the greatest master. It could very well be here sitting in the room, but so we leave that question unanswered. And I didn't specify, but it is really a biography in an attempt to understand not so much Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi is one of the greatest mystical minds of all humankind, not just of the Islamic tradition. But an aspect of him that is not known is that he was also one of the greatest travelers of all times. If you string out his travels, they are probably longer in duration, or as long as those of the more famous Idrisi, They're not quite as long as the other famous traveler, Ibn Battuta. But he traveled 3 times from what was then Andalusia to the east. His 3rd journey was his last journey. So if you just string up the months and years, and if you string up the difficulties and the harshness of the terrain and the problems of communications and transport and so on, you can see that his travels were extraordinary. But they are not ordinary travels, and this will be an entry to my talk, because his travels were what was known as siyaha. If you ask any modern day Arab or Muslim, what does siyaha mean, they will tell you it's tourism. Even something called religious tourism, which means that instead of going to Las Vegas, you go to a sacred place, but generally you do the same thing. And you encourage and improve the economic circumstances of the town. There's nothing wrong with that. But the siyaha of the great beings of the past was to seek the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the earth. It was not curiosity. Then we had curious travelers. Ibn Battuta was one of them. He was curious about various lands and places and their cultures and the way that they organized themselves and their private lives and the way the rulers ruled. That's all fine. But this is different kind of history. This is different kind of travel. There's sacred history and there's sacred geography. It is travel really in order for the self to see the soul in its full luminosity. It is travel in order to see the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in creation. وَسَنُرِيكُمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي. The signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are in the horizons, are everywhere. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ, also within you. And this kind of mind was the mind that did not see the flow of time the way that we do, did not see the unfolding of geographical space the way that we do. To him it was not an area that had verdant grass or had trees or had lakes it was where these signs were effulgent and overwhelming. So siyaha, I think, for it to have any meaning for those who seek awakening is not to travel somewhere for that specific purpose, but to travel anywhere and everywhere to marvel at these things. The other aspects of why I think this journey that he undertook, and myself in a very clumsy way trying to emulate, is to see how what we call generally the unseen, Yadullah, how it acts on time, how it acts in history, how it pushes and moves events, and whether in fact it acts in a way that our limited mind understands. I mean, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually move events in a certain direction? Does He guide events in a certain direction? The answer is yes, but mainly no. No, because the whole point about the events, anything that unfolds in time, anything that unfolds in space, returns back to the entire affair, returns back to Allah. And if we claim that the Quran is our entry into this realm, then we must understand that the whole thing is really His, it's not ours. And whatever is here is as it were on borrowed lease. It's something that has a reality, but its greater reality is elsewhere. So I've always been puzzled as how history moves. Why do you have these major changes? Why do these major inflection points take place in human history? And what are its significance? What's the significance of the fall of apartheid? More importantly, more interesting to me, frankly, is why did this system arise in the first place? Why do human beings divide themselves into nations and classes and tribes and so on, and then differentiate themselves? Frankly, it's more interesting than why this thing breaks out. So again, going back to trying to find a sacred answer, a sacred response to questions that have puzzled people for thousands of years. How do these things unfold? Is there an inevitability in them? Is there a certain arrow that moves in one direction that is not reversible? Is injustice in the world, will it always be reversed in time? Must it be reversed in time? If it's not reversed in time, does that make Allah unjust? Astaghfirullah. These are the questions that have bothered me for really quite a long time. And these are questions I think that must also engulf and must enrobe your own lives. Because by understanding them, by understanding the inner meaning of events, not only can you deal with the outer reality in a much better way, but you can also deal with the rise and fall. There's no rise without a fall. You can take that as a statement of fact. The world of time and history in the Quran is a world of cycles. But these are not cycles, like the seasons. You don't go from winter to autumn winter to spring to summer to autumn and so on. Cycles are different, but it is a cycle. The cycle is from Allah to something that we call existence or creation, and then back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no question about that. And in this, as this thing moves, as these cycles move, they impinge upon us as individuals, they impinge upon us as a group, and certain momentous things happen. Now the question is, well, that's all fine and good, but how do we deal with the here and now? You're talking about cosmic history, but what do I do tomorrow in the face of an unjust government? What do I do today in the face of demands made on me by individuals, by society, and so on? And where is this leading to? Here we come to something else called the frame of reference. What frame are you using? What combination of perspectives, insights, experience, even your genes, they all play a part in creating the way in which you look at, deal with, and engage with events. But their roots are not in you. Their roots lie elsewhere. They manifest themselves in you primarily for you to understand, first of all, that their roots are elsewhere. It's like a person honoring their parents. Their parents are essential. One's parents are essential for one's presence. You cannot honor yourself before you honor what brought you into terrestrial being. So the greater honor, the greatest honor, is one of recognition, knowing, and acknowledgement. This is a general statement. When you move into time, it is really very important that you look at things with perspectives that are appropriate. You can't look at a change of government here and there and say that this is an earth-shaking event and will govern my life over the next 30 or 40 years. It's not like that. You take any event that you want, any important event that you think has been fundamental to your being, to your existence, just distance yourself away from it. Look at it from the framework, not of the last year, but in the last 10 years. Look at it in the framework of the last 50 years. Look at it in the framework of the last 1,000 years. And you'll find that meanings shift all over the place. We've had in the Middle East umpteen revolutions. I really mean it, since World War II, countless. In Iraq we had, maybe 8 before we ended up with the 30-year dictatorship, and we ended up with an invasion. But the invasion and occupation of Iraq, as an example, might be a fantastic event because we've never experienced it before. But I can tell you that my father experienced it in 1941, and my grandfather experienced it in 1917, 1918. So it goes on. This country has been invaded 5 times in the last 70 years, 5 different times. So if you put these in perspective, you get a different understanding of these so-called epical events. As it relates to, so the history of nations, the history of states, is never indefinitely permanent. And one of the admonitions in the Quran is go in the world and see what are the traces of these empires. What are the traces of the great empires that ruled entire stretches of the world? It's not that they were doomed to fail. No, some empires last longer than others. And the Roman Empire lasted after all what? Nearly yes, it's since 200 BC, 600-700 years. But one thing is sure, that empires, their lifespan is shrinking. The American Empire started in 1945, and it's probably ending now. British Empire lasted much longer, lasted nearly 100 years. Other empires, but there is an inevitability in the way that any created entity rises, grows, and then decays. There's no way around that. The point is not to stop the decay, because you won't. You can do it only up to a certain point. Beyond that, it's bound to roll down. So Allah's justice is not so much justice on earth. There's plenty of injustice that is not rectified on earth. Plenty. Wherever you go, every country you go, there's injustices. That nothing happens to it in your lifespan. The Allah's justice, perfect justice, is in the return, the cycle of return. What emanates from returns to the one. So how can you have even greater justice than that? In our collective sense as Muslims, I'm speaking to the audience as Muslims, we have a number of shared experiences, a number of even though we might come from different nations, different genes, different tribes, different ethnicities, but there's certain shared experience that we have. And one of the shared experiences, one of the most important ones that we have, is that we all, I believe, are creatures of what I would call the way that modern Islam has evolved in the last 150 years. And I'll tell you what I mean by modern Islam. Modern Islam is an Islam where the signs of the sacred are not in people's hearts. And this has been going on for 150 years. The reason why it's not in people's hearts is because rather than placing الواحد الأحد الفرد الصمد, the one, the everlasting, the eternal, as the source, the progenitor of their actions, they place some of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which they have appropriated incorrectly to themselves. One of them is the attribute of power. Modern Islam wants power, but it does not want power because it is fi sabilillah. They want power because they think that power is going to open up the doors of expansion and might and control. The other thing that they worship without admitting it is wealth. They open the name, all wealth belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the Ghani, He is the Mughni, He is the ever rich, and He is the enricher. Allah also has all the power. He is the Qadir and He is the Qadir. What we appropriate from that is only correct if it is done fi sabilillah. If it is done with the knowledge that it is appropriated from Him by His permission for our use in His honor, and then indirectly and determinedly in our honor. But when you take those attributes and assume them for yourself, and assume them for your nation, and assume them for the collectivity, it has the opposite effect. The effect is undoubtedly one of temporarily glowing in the splendor of this power, but assuredly decaying. One of the great figures in the Quran is Pharaoh. Now we think of Pharaoh as tyrant and brutal and so on. He's nothing like that. The Quranic Pharaoh is a very, very high being, not an ordinary person. And what he tells his people is what all those who want to so-called reform your deen tell you. He says, if I'm correct, Sheikh Nan said, وَمَا أُرِيكُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ وَمَا أُرِيكُمْ إِلَّا مَا أَرَى.
Is it all or most?
Most. وَمَا أُرِيكُمْ إِلَّا مَا أَرَى وَمَا أَهْدِيكُمْ إِلَّا سَبِيلَ الرَّشَادِ. I do not tell you except what I see for your own good. And my only concern is to guide you to the right path. That's what Pharaoh says. Now, how many of the modern leaders that we have say the same thing? How many of them say that they're actually acting in our interest? They may believe it, and this is a pharaonic high quality, especially if they deliver part or whole of it. But it ceases to be a pharaonic quality because it's an inappropriately, incorrectly, and illegally borrowed attribute and applied to him. So modern Islam, the Islam that started sometime in the mid-19th century and has as its heroes, the so-called heroes, the people that has been called later the founders, the Nahda, the Renaissance, Sayyid Jamaluddin Afghani, Sayyid Ahmed Khan in India, Muhammad Abdu, Rashid Rida, all of these people that we used to think of as great icons of change and reform and so on. In my mind are people who have played a central part in eliminating the sense of the sacred from Islam by relating it only to power and wealth. Their concern is that we have to regain the might of Islam. Why? So we can attack and confront others? What for? The whole thing is not, it is not done in the context of the true abd. Wealth, all this accumulation of wealth and glitter and so on. It's not that you shouldn't accumulate wealth. It's not that that there's something wrong with it. But it's a side result of something else. You should be indifferent to the outcomes. And if you accumulate it as a result of correct action, so much the better for you. And if you don't accumulate it, also so much the better for you. So where did modern Islam take the wrong turn? It took the wrong turn at its beginning. The structure at the beginning was flawed. And everything emanating from it is also flawed. And as a result, it will end, and is ending now. As I speak, this wave that started sometime around 1850, 1860, is coming to an end now. It took all kinds of shapes and turns and twists. Each one of them defined the period. Don't think that we are the only period in time where people were actively Islamic. No. They were very active in the early 20th century. They were very active in defending the so-called Khilafah, which we have elevated into some kind of religious principle when it is really quite an abysmal form of grubby power. That's all it is. The Khilafah, forget the early Khilafahs. The Khilafah is nothing but a form of tyranny and oppression. And has continued that way since the death of Imam Ali. From that time until now, it's been nothing but tyranny. Nothing. Dare anybody tell me one? Of course, people bring out Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Yes, he's a true pious man, but he ruled only for 2 years. So my statement holds. 2 years out of 1350. I think many countries around the world, many have a far better record than that. I mean, even America, the empire that we sometimes rail against, it's been around 400 years, 300 years, and doesn't have this consistent record of oppression and tyranny. You name the worst country in the worst set of countries in the world, and you'll find that there have been. But in the last, why it is more dangerous what has happened in the last 150 years is because we have been mesmerized by the illusion of this modernization reforming program. And because we've been mesmerized by it, it has seized us, a kind of magic. It seizes you, and you believe that by pursuing it, you're going to end in some kind of Shangri-La, some kind of life which is infinitely better than you had before, that also has within it material prosperity, personal piety, and public allegiance to Allah's commands. Nothing has happened in this one. In the last few years, you've had, well, since I would say 1979, there's been an accelerating program of so-called rise of political Islam. But there's also been, every action has its equal and opposite reaction. It's Newton's second law, I think, of mechanics. And it generates sometimes even more violent and more vicious responses. And the kind of cul-de-sacs that we've entered in by extracting the sacred from our knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been really, in my mind, calamitous. And it has fooled people for a long time. But I can't see how it can fool people anymore. Because the program itself is now sunk into the worst kind of sectarianism, the worst kind of divisions, the worst kind of mass hysteria and shunnings and so on, and has been lost in this wilderness. Yesterday I was in a Jumu'ah mosque. I said, as I'm talking, there may be about 30 or 40 people there. I said, somebody can walk in and shout Allahu Akbar, as we are saying Allahu Akbar, and blow us all up. It has reached the point where the trivial has become the elevated, the shallow has become the deep, the marginal has become central. And it has brought, definitely in my mind, the end of this first wave. It's ending in a terrible state of affairs. Alhamdulillah, it hasn't yet ruined people's hearts. It hasn't yet ruined people's original impulse to be in worship. This original pattern it can't influence it. But in this outer manifestation, it has been nothing but a calamity. If you ask any look at what has happened to these miserable 18 months of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Here you have a party that's been screaming and shouting for 80 years, and just puffs away in a matter of a few weeks. The whole system falls apart. You talk to the program of any Islamist party, and you'll find it nothing except watered down versions of 1955 social democracy of Finland. Well, why go to the second-hand version? Might as well go to the first-hand version. They've had 50 years in perfecting it, and they've built a very good society, by the way, in Scandinavia. It's really first class in every way. It's so great that half the world's Muslims want to move there, which is true. You open the doors of immigration to any Islamic country, half of them would move to Scandinavia if they allow them, and the other half would end up in England or in America. Not America these days. Those who go to America, I met a group, Sheikhna, of Iraqi migrants in America, and they asked me, how can we get papers to move to Sweden? So there you are. You're just basically like a snake eating its own tail. And pretty soon there'll be nothing left. There'll be a puff like that. It'll go away. You have to really wake up. You have to wake up to how first of all, Allah's actions, that it is not done directly, it is done within you. What you see outside are just really trivial manifestations of power. Nothing, they're just fluff. The greatest action is on you, because it is through your perception that you see the outside. It is through your eyes that you give value to things. They don't have any value in themselves. So the agent of value, the agent of giving worth to things is the individual. There's no other mechanism of cognition on creation except the individual. There's no such thing as, and by individual I mean individual man and an individual woman. There's no such thing as a human being. I mean, show me a human being. A human being is composed of these two parts. So if you don't polish your perceptive sight and develop what is known in spiritual terms, the inner sight, you'll really never get what's going on outside. And you'll never be able to deal with it. It's good and it's bad. It's rough and it's smooth. It's the truth, the limited truth in it, and the limited falsehood in it. These cycles are in Allah's eyes, there are no cycles. There's only the reality, there's only haqq. In our limited eyes, there are cycles. And the inward cycle is to understand that in the world, in the outer world, there are two aspects to it. There's the aspect of it, the infinite return. And there's the aspect of what you do with things now. And what you do with things now is, do not be carried away by the events of the last 5 minutes, or the newscast, or this constant screaming on TV that you hear, or listening to these monsters on YouTube. By the way, much more interesting than what they say on YouTube is the comments. The comments will tell you a lot about the state of the Muslims. I was watching a person who had so-called 2 million hits or something. Is that the word? 2 million hits? The comments were so venomous. It's really incredible the kind of hate there is out there. This is the reality of a large number of Muslims, driven by a blind hate. Blind hate. And it expresses itself in this person who, as you say Allahu Akbar in the mosque, he also says, but he kills you all in the mosque. This happens all the time in Iraq. All the time. And not in just Shia mosques, Sunni mosques, Christian churches.
Pakistan, Syria, Egypt.
Expand it more. Pakistan, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. Every day it happens. Every day somebody blows himself shouting Allahu Akbar. Some disturbed maniac. These cycles, I think we're now ending that cycle. We're ending the cycle of what I would call the desacralization of Islam, which has driven Muslims into not seeing the acts and signs of Allah around them. Here I might defer with others, greater people, as to what the next cycle is all about. The next cycle all about, I think, will be a much shorter cycle of even worse violence and worse. But then, inshallah, it would cleanse itself out. Why do I say that this cycle is ending? Because it has nowhere else to go. Things end when they have nowhere else to go. It's like you drive and hit a wall. There's nowhere else to do except to acknowledge that this thing is coming to an end. So the Islam of power, the Islam that thinks of itself in terms of wealth. There's a mosque in Abu Dhabi that was budgeted for $200 million. It ended up costing $6 billion. What can you imagine what $6 billion? And I don't think it's ever used. I really don't think so. There's a mosque every 100 yards in Abu Dhabi. Every 100 yards there's a mosque. They must have, if you take the cumulative investment in mosques in the United Arab Emirates over the last 20 years, I would say it's probably 20 billion. Used by a population that is 200,000 people, tops. And a whole army of very poor and indigent workers who are intimidated by all this marble and don't go in. Some of them are Muslims. They end up praying on the roundabout and parking in the middle of town. So appropriateness. This is not what we are supposed to be. This is not ummatan wasata. It is not. It cannot be. So wealth is power. Power as it unfolds in politics can only be justified, and there's no other reason for going into politics except to manifest the public interest as seen through the eyes of Tawheed. There's no other purpose to it. Anybody who's in politics and is exercising power, who does not put the public interest above his private interest, then I think you're in a terrible condition. And there is no sense of the public interest in any Muslim country. Of course, when I say there's no sense, of course there is some, but it ranges from 30% to 0%. Well, by that I mean where the private interests do not experience as wealth and power, do not take precedence over the public interest. That's why nothing happens. That's why we have nearly about $4 trillion of Muslim funds generated from Islamic countries, are held abroad. For good reason, frankly. Because if you bring them here, either the rulers will seize them or they'll be put to wasted. So, of course, the biggest chunk of that belongs to these people. So the trip for wealth has led to the most grotesque inequalities anywhere in the world. There are inequalities that are unconscionable in these countries, that will not be tolerated for 10 minutes in any advanced democracy. They won't be. And here we're saying, well, alhamdulillah, we're Muslims. Of course we're Muslims, but not this kind of Islam. So it's eating itself, and it is now destroying itself in this final spasm of mass hysteria and violence and killings. It's going to burn itself out. What will come after that? Allahu A'lam. If we don't wake up to your responsibilities as luminous agents working in order to realize the knowledge and spread the knowledge of that the whole affair, al-amr kullahu, returns back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think we're wasting our time as Muslims. There are other and probably better Muslims who don't call themselves Muslims. But things being the way they are, I think no, because the powers that be, the great princes that lord it over this whole land, feel threatened, feel that they are on the verge of being annihilated, and will put up a very, very fierce struggle. But in the end, they're doomed. They don't. In the Quran, I'm in Surah Rum, which is the Quran. In my view, I think maybe Sheikh may or may not concur, but my engagement with it is that there are surahs that deal with certain key aspects of existence. Surah Rum is about power, and it is mainly about power and how you should deal with power and what is the meaning of power and why power is cyclical. People spend their lives trying to say, what did the Quran mean when they say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ? When did this happen? Who was it? Was it I don't know, Justinian, who was the emperor of the Byzantines? Was it whoever it was, Kisra in charge of the Iranian, the Persians? It's really irrelevant. These are, I think, useless exercises. Good for scholars of history, but bad for people who want to know. غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ is the beginning of a cycle, because the next ayah says this turned against them. And then Allah says in the end, the third ayah, لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَمِنْ بَعْدُ. The entire affair belongs to Him or after. So the Roman Empire won, then it loses, then it wins again. So we all, subhanAllah, of course, subhanAllah, always. But if the Roman Empire won and then won again, it's also subhanAllah. But it will lose in the end, because the cyclicality of sacred time is essential to it. The cyclicality being beginning and end is at one point, so you have to go back. The end is the beginning is the end. So look at events through this eye. You'll feel much better, first of all. Otherwise, I don't know how you can handle all this news. I mean, I haven't heard news in the last 2 days. I really feel much better now. Honestly. Otherwise, I'd spend all my time on Iraqi news digest sites and wondering why this happened there, and so it never ends. So I can only conclude. I can go and make all kinds of comments, but I will stop. Yes, I shall conclude by saying إِنَّا اللَّهُ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ, and that the affair, al-amr, belongs to Allah from the beginning until the end. So don't think you will ever escape this by somehow exaggerating one of Allah's names and attributing it to yourself. The Ghani, the all wealthy, is also the Mughni, the granter of wealth. And Al-Qadir, is the enabler, is also the Qadir, the doer. So power is everything, just comes and slips by. Meanwhile, I think you have to deal with what's in front of you. So alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Allawi, for sharing your thoughts on this important topic. I'm sure many of you have been stimulated to ask questions and make comments and so on. I have myself a couple of questions, but I'll leave those until then. So I'll go back.
MashaAllah, Dr. Allawi. I think you've given us a good synopsis, but it's a bit of a sailor as well. I would like to ask you.
But why sad?
Why?
Yeah, I think he's very happy, on the contrary.
Actual.
That too comes to an end.
I'd like you to speculate upon what is the next wave that you refer to. If you are going to speculate, but I hope you would, I would like to maybe ask you to present the type of a curriculum. Now, I know Shaykh Lala has also presented a wonderful idea of challenging the individual to relate to the akhlaq and idea of knowing the Creator in terms of transformation and even transcendence. what is your position in terms of dealing with day-to-day issues, dealing with day-to-day education, dealing with a position where each individual can sort of secure for himself in what the next way then could be a meaningful position for speculation?
I think one of the greatest
Reality, rather.
one of the greatest problems that we've had as Muslims is really the closing of the mind. We think in terms of Western paradigms, but we don't really admit it. We talk in terms of we need an Islamic reformation on the grounds that there's some kind of Sharia that's old-fashioned and so on, and we have to change it to be with the times. Or we think in terms of an Islamic enlightenment. We have to allow reason to rule. We don't need any of that. And we've tried all of that. We've tried enlightenment, and it's led to all the most extreme forms of takfir. You take takfiri thinking, you link it back, and it goes to the rationality, so-called, that was imposed on the modern course of Islam by people like Muhammad Abda. Reason is a very dangerous thing if it leads to the abandonment of Allah. A very dangerous thing, and a very doesn't mean you have to not have reason. Enlightenment is a false doctrine, it's a false concept. It applies to people who have been under the yoke of an oppressive church. Who has oppressed you? We've oppressed ourselves. There is no great church up there. So the Islamic Enlightenment has ended, in my mind, in the more extreme forms of violence, takfir, and exclusionism. And Islamic Reformation has led to what? To what kind of sectarianism? It has led to division and strife. What we need is something else, which we haven't had for a long, long time. We need to reignite our imaginative faculties. In the West, it was called the Romantic Revolution. And it has a very, very powerful, people don't think of it as important, a very powerful effect on all kinds of movements that we think of as defining movements, from social service movements to movements dealing with mass piety. There's an element of imagination in all this. The imaginative faculty is completely de-emphasized and destroyed. And without it, without this kind of gasp of awareness, which opens for you all kinds of creative impulses, we're not acting out the name of Allah al-Khaliq. It's Allah al-Khaliq, al-Bari al-Musawwir. So are you, in any way, do you do anything that is not repetitious or different? Do you fashion things in ways that are both right, correct, pleasing, as well as being... No. Imaginative reasoning is essential, not only to have a better outer life, but to reignite long dormant faculties of khayal, of waham. These things are, if you ask a person what is waham, he'll tell you, oh, this fellow has waham, is illusion. It's not illusion. It's the opposite of it. Khayal is how do you deal with things that have not yet been conjured up? Why don't we have any great architects anymore? Why don't we have any great musicians anymore? Why don't you have any poetry? There is some limited life left to it. But all the aspects that give modern civilization its vitality is lost in us. And it has been replaced by two things. One is this political, that somehow through the political route we're going to somehow solve. It is a dead end, believe me. And the evidence is in front of you. Right in front of you. The Muslim Brotherhood, 80 years old Muslim party, when they were thrown out of power, they did not appeal to their Islamic program. They appealed to the democratic rights of an elected. So what's this all about? Why should I vote for the Muslim Brotherhood if they believe in democracy? I might as well vote for a democratic party or a liberal democratic party. So is it what? Is Islam now politics, power, plus a bit of public piety, So it has dead end. One of the dead ends is a political, and the other dead end is you end up worshipping, not Allah, you end up worshipping the forms which man has fashioned as being approximations of what the Sharia is. Now, it's very difficult, of course, to say, you cannot. The Sharia is Sharia Allah, this is the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are aspects of it that are permanent, and there are aspects of it that are changing. But the changing must change. can't just stay. We can't. We will. We are in ijtihad, and therefore we will change our views. It's not true. One of the claims that the Shia make is that their ulamas have not closed the doors of ijtihad. Not true. There's nothing new that has been said in the last 500 years in the Shia world. I challenge anybody to say otherwise. So it's all the same. It is encapsulation, limitation, in an oppressive form, and you have to break this. And to break this, you have to begin to think and act and believe imaginatively. There are aspects of it, and the finer, the subtler aspects of life. So that's, if you ask me what my program is, this is my program.
Perhaps you could give shorter answers to give.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Dr. Allawi, the issue of the pursuit of power or wealth or happiness, from your perspective, what would sanction this in Islam? And secondly, you talked about the new wave. How do you see this new wave that you say is coming into being with the end of this present cycle?
A short answer is to follow the instructions I've been given, is that power and wealth should always be incidental to what you're doing. If you're a businessman and you act correctly and you act appropriately and you amass wealth, fantastic. Nothing wrong with it. But if your purpose is to amass wealth for its sake, it will go away. So why are you doing a futile act anyway? I mean, all that you're going to earn will end up in somebody else's pocket when you're gone. So the physical or material manifestations of actions, if they generate what is considered to be positive results, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a powerful prince or ruler or prime minister if he's focused on the public interest. There's nothing wrong with that. But if he's focused on his personal interest or his group interest or his family interest or his party interest, then there's nothing but perdition in there.
Yes. Ladies? Let's give the chance to the ladies first. No? Yeah?
I had a question about whether you think, when you just mentioned now about this is a worship of the construct rather, in fact, if you could elaborate on that being a form of shirk, and whether in order to break from this hardened shell of this worship of the construct of Islam rather than our Lord, whether it needs critical mass of people who are focused inwardly rather than outwardly on this romantic dream of an Islamic state.
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody would want to dream anymore about Islamic states because we've had our shot at it, right? And you can see what it has produced, right? Who would want to live in the Taliban? They believe they have an Islam. They say we have. It's called the Islamic Emirate of Pakistan. Was started as the Islamic State of Pakistan for the Muslims of India. Where else is Sudan? Iran, the jury is still out. I'll tell you frankly. But by and large, it's not moving in the direction of any connection, I think, with the original impulse. It's moving into a kind of bureaucratic military authoritarianism with a very strong development orientation. Where else do you have Islamic states? Sudan, we said Taliban.
Saudis claim that.
Saudis, yes, Saudis. They say the Quran is our constitution. I mean, it's great if you're a Saudi, but it's not very great if you're a poor immigrant laborer from Bangladesh. So the Islamic State really is out, and I don't think we should even talk about it. Even Islamists have abandoned it. So it's like people talking about, I'm a communist, and the Communist Party changed its name to, I don't know, the Welfare Party. The other aspect of your question is that it's not focusing inwards rather than outwards. There always has to be a balance. But there has to be an inward side too. There are forms of worship that are by and large fixed. And as Shaykh Fadlallah said, if you can find a better way of doing your salat, please tell us. This is a nearly complete package. if I do my prayers like that or my hands down, these are incidental. And they're incidental in the true sense of the word. So the forms, there's no reason to change them. But I don't worship the form, or you don't worship the you have to understand when you're doing your iqamah and so on, that you're focusing your attention, your resource to one. And if you're one of those with great fortune, you then dissolve into the state of, which will come in time, inshallah, where these things, these boundaries no longer exist. So how do you get Muslims not to worship the forms? It's going to take a lot of work, because it took a lot of work before they got here. They've deformed it so much that it takes another, I don't know, 100, 200, 300, but time will be shorter now because it's easier.
Yes, brother.
Just another additional point in what has been said so far, in this sort of darkness that we caught ourselves into, with the sort of power materialistic minus spiritualism and enlightenment. It reminds us of, we have eyes but we cannot see, and we have hearts that we cannot sort of understand. How can one sort of pour into that sense of direction? Because everywhere we go, we've got 2 billion Muslims, and we all sort of economically enslaved and caught in this sort of mode of power and wealth as being sort of the utopia. And to break that cycle, I know you've mentioned 2 cycles and a 3rd cycle may be coming through, but I was just wondering that, is the ritual an end in itself, or is it supposed to be a means to an end?
The ritual is both a means as well as a purpose, because it's expressed in a perfected form in order to achieve certain purpose, certain function, and there's a certain natural rhythm to it. There's a natural, the way that salat is constructed, for example, in these 5 hours, 5 times a day, is really to do with the natural cycle of the day. It's nothing to do with your watch. Because you have to do salat at a certain point, and it's not necessarily governed by the mechanical clock of time. So the timelessness is there. The annual fast, the annual stripping away. Hajj, you do Hajj in order to disrupt your sense of space. I don't know if, I'm sure all of you who's been on Hajj, the first thing that you have, unless you spend it, huddling away with your friends and plotting and scheming, which is what happens quite a lot in Hajj, is that you lose a sense of space, and then you lose a sense of time. That's the whole purpose of it. Otherwise, the rituals, if you look at them, what are they running back and forth? What does it mean? Or standing on top of a hill and throwing stones at. So it is to do with tasting or experiencing nothingness, nothingness, before you actually see it in its final form. So the billions of Muslims in the world, unless they understand the full meaning of their deen, which in its essential form is the deen al-Hanif. This is the way, the original deen. This is the deen of Prophet Adam. We should all be honored to have that. You are supposed to be on the path of all the prophets, ending on the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Starts with Adam. So why do we allow ourselves not to think of this package in any other way? Or to think of it, well, it's this way. If it's not this way, it's that way. And I have to wear my trousers 3 inches above or 4 inches below. Fine, if that's what makes you happy, good. But do not confuse what makes you happy with what is required by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're 2 different things.
Yes, brother.
Doctor, we're very comforted, I think, all of us, to hear about the progression of the cycle and the fact that the end is imminent. Do you think that in recognizing that cycle and the snake going to eat its own tail, that we might land up being somewhat complacent about the need to accelerate the cycle? Can it be accelerated? It has to be accelerated. Does one not have to be consciously attempting to accelerate it so that the end of what is an evil cycle comes sooner and the beginning of the good one is accelerated?
Well, it starts with you. It starts with the individual. Charity begins at home. For example, excess. You must learn to limit your consumption to the point where it satisfies you and satisfies the needs of society. Limiting consumption is the best way you can strike a blow at capitalism. That's what you want to do. Right? limitation. I'm not saying be an ascetic and live in a cave, no. But act in ways that are appropriate, act in ways that are correct, act in ways that are driven by an ulterior, larger purpose, without being smug about it. I'm a holy man and all that, and just abide by the duties imposed on you are really minimal, frankly. I mean, one of the prophetic hadith is that just after he came back from Qaba Qawsayn or Adna, the prayers were supposed to be 50 or 40 times a day, and then as he descended back, they were reduced to what is manageable. People should be in salatiyun da'imun. You should be in constant acknowledgement of this.
Absolutely.
So these obligations are minimal, I think, really minimal, if you think about it. The only difficulty I have is Sawm in northern climates, frankly. I mean, you need a fatwa for it. I mean, when the fast breaks at 10 o'clock in Birmingham, it's a tough time.
One of the good things about traveling around the world is it gives you a chance to experience different things in different environments. So I remember fasting in Iraq in summer, very hot weather, when we were doing our final exams, high school exams. And at the same time, I remember fasting in UK when we had very long hours but cold weather. And the best of the places is South Africa. If there are no other questions, I would like to. Zahar, maybe the last question, because I want to get more of him. I have a couple of questions to dig deeper.
Just a short question.
Sorry.
From this, is the Islamic message then ultimately about self-regulation? Is that fundamentally what we move towards, where one, in a sense, watches themselves?
No, it's not self-regulation. It's self-liberation. Self-regulation is to use Sheikh's word, is boring. It's liberation is more interesting than regulation. I mean, who wants to be in a prison? So, it's to liberate yourself. It's to be free. Free. The soul is always free. The self, in order to be free, has to recognize its limitations. So, it's not self-limitation. It's recognition of limitation on the path of liberation. How's that?
I guess we all need to remember that we are not here as our final destination. We are here to live in an environment to get there. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن. We always need to remember that there is a purpose, and we need to use whatever resources we have to help us get there. And this is one of the nicest things about Islamic teachings. There is a high degree of balance between immersing yourself into getting more power and wealth and so on, more materialistic, and using whatever resources you have to get there and get there as fast as possible and get to the highest level. Dr. Allawi, Sayyid al-Sadr rahmatullah alayhi, has a very nice and relevant book that he talked about the Sunan al-Ijtima'iyya of the Quran, the social laws that govern individual community social laws. And there he talks a lot about إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. So we have been talking a lot about identifying the crisis that Muslims, Muslim community societies are going through. But what is the remedy? What do we need to do as individuals, communities and societies in order to influence events and maybe shorten the current cycle and avoid or making it even shorter the next cycle and get there where we are supposed to be moving?
I mean, if you read the ayah again, Excellency, you'll find the answer is there. You have to change. If you want to change the outer world, you have to change your inner world. You have to change your own reality. And it really is as simple as that. They get away with abuse and oppression and destructiveness. It's because we find reasons for it. We justify it. I'll give you a very simple example. Look at Mecca. Has anyone been to Mecca recently? Really, it's like Luna Park. You have this thing sitting on top with beaming supposed to be a clock. The Quran says there are ayahs in the Quran about not building a barrage like that try to reach Allah. The whole thing is a huge land speculation. One of the most sacred space on earth for Muslims is the Kaaba. But the Kaaba has been dwarfed by the signs of Pharaoh all around us. Not a peep amongst Muslims. Not a peep. Why are we all afraid of the Saudis? Are we all afraid of that this thing? Somehow if we say something, they won't give us a visa? This destructiveness all over the place. Destruction of sacred space without anybody. And not just this particular, I'm not just picking on the Saudis, no. It happens everywhere, including in Iran. I hope it does not happen in Iraq, but I'm pretty sure it will. I'm pretty sure they'll start knocking this down and knocking that down because we have 16 million visitors every year. The whole city has to be turned into a marble mausoleum. These things are up to us to stand up against. And when you see oppression, you have to, as the Prophet said, you change it with your hand. If you can't do that, you change it with your tongue. If you can't do that, you change it with your heart. But everywhere there's crying out for change, crying out for people to do something about it. Again, another very simple, we talk about charity, zakat or khums. I will bank on it now that the total amount of affordable zakat paid by Muslims is probably 0.01 of what the entitlement is. I'm sure of that. You see the behavior of the extremely wealthy, you see the behavior of those, and compare them to those countries of the kuffar, as we call them. Their charitable works are really, they make us look puny. While the entire deen of Islam is built on purifying your wealth, is built on that. Your Islam is not complete if you don't. So if you do all of these things, and these are the real signs of change. The most difficult one, as the Quran says, is that you will not gain righteousness unless you expend what you really love. And you know what I don't know what you love, but you know what you really love. It could be your bank account, it could be your silk scarf, it could be this, it could be that. Parting with that is the beginning of the process of changing people. And they will change, and then the outer environment will change.
The second, we will have a break in a couple of minutes. This final question. You referred to some of the poor examples of states and experiences presented in the name of Islam. You also touched upon the limitations as far as the most relevant experience that happened in Iran. Do you think there is any hope that we get a model somewhere in the Muslim world? And let me just specifically ask about the experience that is evolving in Iran. Do you think we have any hope that we will present a model that brings to the service the positive aspects of our rich Islamic heritage, but also engages with the modern good experiences around the world and have something that combine the two and will be appealing?
I'll answer you by reference to something that I'll share with you. When I was offered a ministerial post, I did not take it immediately. I called Sheikh Farhan. And he was very positive about it. But he sent me, within about a week after I went to Baghdad, he sent me a fax. There were faxes those days. And the fax said, and I'll repeat that, it's really prescient. Until and unless the Shia and the Sunni take their hand of each other, and until their leaders and scholars take their hands with each other, not in some artificial, we're all unity, lovey-dovey stuff, but real love of Allah, this country will have nothing but hardship. I have it, it's faded, I'm a bit faded. I don't know if you recall that shit. But I fixed it, I have it on my computer. Even though it's faded, it's clear. What we can show the world festival. We have, Iraq is, people say they are 60% Shia, whatever. It's, to me, is immaterial. There are large numbers of various communities of the Muslim world inside Iraq.
Muslim and Christians.
Two things they have to do. One is that they have to transcend sectarianism. They have to hold each other's hands and say, I'm a lover of Ahlul Bayt, the Sunni would say. And the Shia would return and say, I'm a lover of the Prophet and I'm the lover of all those who are in the line of the Prophet, whether they are Imams or not. That's rule number one. Rule number two is that the Arabs had hold hands with the Kurds and say, we're all brothers in the eyes of Allah. So you defeat sectarianism and you defeat nationalism. The two curses of the Muslims. Both of them. Until, without that, I think, and if Iraq can succeed in doing that, I think it will be the wonder of wonders.
With that valuable advice, we end this session and have a break. And inshallah, we will continue after the break with the Sheikh's speech.
Is that yours?